Hey everybody, it's me Jen, and I am back again on this Thursday, July 10th, to talk about my most passionate subject in life at this point. And this is primarily addressed to anybody that is either suffering, experiencing, on, trying to taper off, have been abruptly cut off, or it's just overall having some difficulties they either may understand part of or not understand any of it concerning benzodiazepines. Other psychiatric drugs, more commonly known as SSRIs, I believe that's serotonin reuptake inhibitors, something along those lines. But basically everything in the psychiatric group, but with a very special, passionate for advocacy for people struggling with benzodiazepine, especially if you're at the very beginning of your journey and it hasn't even been prescribed yet, but it may be being suggested. Today I really want to focus in, you can go back and check out my playlist. I've covered a lot of my own personal stories, responded to some comments and questions that have come up on my feed, and today I just knew it was very, very important to address the difference in both being prescribed and the ability to safely taper or come off of it according to your socioeconomic situation. In other words, there is a very, very vast, huge difference, obviously, in people either living just above the poverty line as opposed to, maybe a 1%er, people that are very, very wealthy. They have access to, and I in no way mean this as a, you're a victim or it's not fair because you have better treatment. Thank God that they do. But for the vast majority of us that are struggling with this, especially if we don't know a whole lot about it to begin with and why it's even happening to us, and it is ultimately a result of a withdrawal or an improper taper, or the worst case scenario, an abrupt cutoff from a benzodiazepine, and the difference in treatment and resources that we can get according to our economical status and our finances. I recently shared on a video about the story of Dr. Jordan Peterson. He's like a superstar on YouTube, very well known, came up rapidly with a lot of success. Academic, I think he was a tenured professor at college teaching psychology and psychology courses in Canada. And I also, don't hold me to this, believe he might have had a private practice. And, he's an author of several phenomenal books, and it just seems to be a very, very kind person. He's recently just opened his own college, the the Peterson Academy, I believe it's called. But if you want information on that, give me a shout out in the comments, or you can look him up. But this story, I'm conveying it as told by Dr. Yosef at the Tapering Clinic on YouTube. As far as I'm concerned, the leading expert, new school form of thinking in psychiatry and treatment, and the testimonies of the people that have gone through this, that he's been able to help or get help for, are just phenomenal. I'm going to touch on one a little bit down the road, but there is a vast, vast difference. Obviously, Dr. Peterson, is in an economic class that most of us are not. The greater majority of us that are who have ever been prescribed a benzodiazepine or have ever struggled with it are not. And I guess this was something he was prescribed later, I think after his whole YouTube success and fame. And even before that, I don't know for sure, but it doesn't sound like they were by any stretch, on the poverty line or anywhere near it. Um, but you could actually see when he was, I would say when he first began to take it or was first being prescribed, his whole persona changed on YouTube. Yeah, I have like a big parasocial relationship going with a lot of YouTubers, and I say that as a ha ha ha. But I think with YouTube, as opposed to Hollywood, you have the likelihood. I'm not saying by any stretch believe everybody is exactly who they say they are. But a lot of commentators that I listen to and follow, I believe they're probably pretty much the same person when they're not making a video. But you could clearly see something changing in Dr. Peterson around the time I believe he started being prescribed. And if I'm off a detail and you want to provide some clarity about that, by all means, please do so down in the comments. But this is just my repeat of the gist of the story, and hopefully it won't be like the circle game when you whisper in somebody's ear, and by the time it gets to the last person, it's something totally different. But you could see after his uprise, and I guess that was the around the time, and he's older, he's more closer to my age and my generation, boomer, shall I say, and you could see the difference in his content. And I'm not on X a whole lot anymore, but when I was, you could even hear it. The rants, the stuff was nonsensical. I mean, this guy's literally a genius. There was one interview he did with Joe Rogan, and which he was trying to explain some of this. A lot of people made fun of him, basically, because he initially had said something about a reaction that he was having to apple cider vinegar. And then a lot of people started inappropriately pouncing on him, saying that, he was addicted to benzodiazepines and he's blaming it on apple cider vinegar, whatever that case was. But he was definitely starting to have some pretty severe reactions as a result of the withdrawal, which I want to say, was a cold turkey thing. And in this interview with Joe Rogan, he had Joe had questioned him about the fact that it was out there that he had not slept for 25 nights in a row. It's just inconceivable to absolutely anybody, except if you are in a withdrawal or an improper tapering process with benzodiazepines. About literally going months and months with no sleep. My own experience is, that I couldn't even give you a number of nights and days. I know they on and off throughout the year. The very best I could hope for while in a withdrawal or in a taper was to maybe a couple hours before I had to get my son up to get ready for school, dozing off, 20, 40, maybe 50 minutes. And when that happened, I knew, because I would have if not outright horrifying nightmares, the weirdest, most bizarre dreams, whatever was happening in my brain. If dreams are a reflection of what's going on subconsciously, it was pretty bizarre. But yeah, he said, people can't do that. How could you not sleep for 25 nights in a row? And he answered very matter-of-factly, I lay down in the bed for 8 hours, frozen in utter terror, and got up in the morning and went about my day as best as he could. And in his particular case, they tried to return him to the benzodiazepine on both lower doses and higher doses. Nothing was working. Everything was getting rapidly and continuously worse, including, what's commonly known and what most of us can experience. All of a sudden, these hyper sensitive food allergies, chemical allergies, right down to sometimes your laundry detergent. And I'm not talking about, irritations or, a known allergy that you might have had all your life. I'm talking about like abruptly, all of a sudden, extreme hypersensitivity with all of the senses, vision. I'm not talking hallucinations, but just severe vision impairment. I know for me, light was an absolute nightmare. I could not bear it, especially fluorescent light, but even the beautiful sunlight. Constant spots, and maybe blurry in one eye and not the other, but an overall decrease of what was always 20/20 vision, never a need for even readers, like well into my 50s, and rapid declines. It was during those times of withdrawal, looking back, that I could see that was horribly impaired. Ear and hearing problems. I'm seeing more and more like severe cases of tinnitus. I know I'm probably not saying that right, but just severe ear ringing. And we're not talking about that, once in a while you get a little ring in your ear and it's uncomfortable. It can be persistent and nonstop, which is that's actually almost like a psychological form of torture. Excuse me. Smells, taste, major digestive problems. We just don't break down foods the same way, and you topple on all this with no sleep, and the psychological part, the word I'm hearing over and over and over and over again, is just torture. And people often say, to call it that just doesn't seem to do it justice for what it really is. And I can totally identify with that. The agoraphobia, the inability to move. I would just go into like TV land. I could not leave my room, but I did have, as sensitive as I was, I did have to have something going on in the background, and TV seemed to do the trick for me. I could control the volume. I could control, when I wanted to close my eyes and look away, and when I wanted to look. A lot of times it didn't even matter what was actually on. Although, now when I watch it, I have a real serious passion, guys, about this particular topic, having really coming into a deeper understand of what happened to me, and what can still happen. And a lot of these things that, even over the past few years, I've done a serious taper in the past 4 years. I started off, I think, in 2019 through 2020 at 5 milligrams of Klonopin, and I'm now down to 2. And I feel very stable. I live a very, very healthy lifestyle, including exercise, and I try not to be, go insane with the diet, but especially compared to 7 years ago, I just try to keep it what I would call live food. If it comes from an animal, the ground, a tree, a plant, I'm down with it. And refined sugar, big no-no for me. Gluten, definitely, there's a connection for that. All processed foods, chemicalized stuff with a lot of dyes in it, done. And a repertoire of some pretty seriously chosen by my wonderful husband, who's a chiropractor, and we actually sell for a few of these companies that require a medical license to even be able to obtain. And that I remember when my son was younger, going through junior high and high school, and always having a multivitamin and sometimes even another kind of a supplement. I'm talking about like an over the counter, just anything multivitamin. And they would just sit there. And I remember looking at my ex husband once and saying, "Why don't we ever take these?" And he was just like, too simple. But he actually was able to select a very specific set of supplements. The first one he nailed was something for leaky gut. He literally just popped into my room one morning, and we were both trying to figure out what was going on with me because I was pretty stabilized on my dosages by then. And he pops in, he says, "You got leaky gut," you know. And sure enough, that the supplement and kind of started from there. And then exercise is the ride or die thing. I think in assisting in tapering, very difficult to even think or about any of this, or much less do any of these things or take them into consideration if you're in the middle of an intense withdrawal, which for some people can last a very, very long time. That was the last thing I would have been able to connect dots to. And even if I could, my ability to do them would have been, it was so compromised. It was absolutely incredible. I would do just all the wrong things. I was so worried about my son at the time, and just having the physical and psychological energy, to make sure that he is cared for, and interacting, and emotional needs were met, all the physical needs were met, that all my energy would go into that. And since I never had any, and I was also unfortunately a heavy smoker, looking back now I can see that nicotine is kind of a stimulant. So I would just chug caffeine and smoke, and all the very worst offenses you can do to your body, period, but especially if you're in any type of withdrawal or tapering process at all. Stimulants, bad. Stimulants, bad, period. If you're on any type of stimulant medication for like ADD and you're considering a taper, going again off the I knew this, but Dr. Yosef just confirms everything. Like, I think in my intuition and my gut that I knew. It's just so hard for us to get validation. And let me back up into the topic of the socioeconomics and tell you the story about one of the testimonies. He was actually involved as an expert witness in an 8-figure lawsuit for this woman. We'll get more into that at another time too. That was just almost impossible. Maybe even 5-10 years ago, these guys are just untouchable. But she was, it wasn't unprecedented, but she basically like opened the door and kind of led the way. She was an intensive care pediatric nurse. And obviously this wasn't just a job, it was her vocation, it was her life, and she was good at it, well respected among all her peers. I believe she was like charge nurse, head nurse, or even manager of the unit that she worked on with these very, very sick little babies. She literally held the life of little babies in her hand based on her decisions. And she had been on these, it was recommended to her, I forget why, but it was a primary care kind of a deal. And for whatever reason, it came down to it, I think she did an abrupt stop. And she had no idea that they had done anything or going to do anything or what was happening. Or I think it took her a minute to make the connection to benzodiazepine withdrawal, but her whole life started rapidly changing. Obviously, the first place is, and just to back it up too, she was actually making more money than the doctors on this. I think she said something about $250,000 a year. So she was ranked up that high in her vocation, her profession, her passion. Um, I think the thing she loved the most outside of family was what she did. And, she just started noticing she was making mistakes that you can't make. And she had enough presence of mind to make sure her nurses, they tend to do a double check on things like, especially when you're dealing with tiny infants and children, those dosages have to be exact measurements. You have to know exact weight. You have to be able to just do math off the top of your head without even thinking twice about it. And she was finding all of a sudden, after all these years, she couldn't do that. And she was not only having her staff double check, but please triple check, and she started talking to her family about it. And, because they were just noticing bizarre changes. Eventually it just totally crippled her. She was unable to work, unable to get out of bed. She needed assistance just for basic hygiene. Driving was absolutely off the table. She was in, what we now know was acute benzodiazepine withdrawal, probably, she was absolutely already had bind. I don't think you can be in bind because it's an actual diagnosis in and of itself. It's a brain injury. That's what it stands for, BIND, and it is benzodiazepine, specifically naming that family of drugs, induced neurological disorder. And it is literally a brain injury. It was measured by neurofeedback that she was able to obtain in this whole lawsuit process. Who Dr. Yosef got involved, as he was called, to be an expert witness. So things just went on a rapid decline. There was no money coming in, and the bills still had to be paid. And at one point, when she finally talked to her doctor about it, the first response was, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. You've been off it a month. You shouldn't be having any symptoms at all. It's totally out of your system." And I still don't know, like, are they the ones that really believe that, or are they just supposed to say that? And he was honest enough to say that he was kind of stumped. He wasn't quite sure how to proceed, and told her, um, you know, to check with a psychiatrist, and which she did. But you got to remember, like, all the people she was referred to, including the therapists, were all under the same medical umbrella or company, a corporation, or however you want to put it. And it became known amongst them that this was going to be a problem, I think, way before she ever even considered anything like a lawsuit. She wound up getting psychiatric care through this same group, and seemingly sympathetic. He said, you have a couple options here. We can put you back on the benzodiazepine and taper you off a little bit more slowly. We can put you on something else, and I forget what the third option was. We could hospitalize you. And whichever option she took, she did not want to go back on and taper off, but they did start loading her up. She did, it wasn't named in the video, but they did start loading her up with a lot of, my best guess would be various SSRIs and, things, some of them are like, they'll say like, oh, Cymbalta, if you have pain, it's great for pain. And there's another one, Remeron, if you're having appetite problems, it'll stimulate your appetite. So, they boost them up even more with some of the possible off-label help they might be able to give. But in her particular case, it just came down to the degradation and humiliation that they put her through, and I'm going to do a whole video about this. Where is our personal accountability and responsibility in this whole fiasco that is benzodiazepine? How much of it are we responsible for? The only thing I will prelude that video right now with is the fact that most of us, when we're being prescribed these, and we don't know a whole lot about that family. I did when I first met my psychiatrist, who I never wanted to even be involved with. I just wanted a therapist, but that was the only way you could get around to one. And they're not, I've yet to even hear of a doctor until Dr. Yosef, who probably wouldn't prescribe these to anybody to begin with, but if so, is going to give you, full, honest, transparent disclosure. The worst possible case scenario and the truthful percentage of people that it happens to, and lets you make an informed decision. Period. They don't do it. They really present it as the happy pill, the cure for whatever ails you. Basically, all they're doing is medicating normal and the human condition. That's what it comes down to. But in her case, why she just got furious. She was being treated in this like dehumanizing, horrible way. And actually, even by her peers and the own hospitals that she worked with, they started accusing her of drug seeking. At one point, the psychiatrist that she was working with, under the same group as the primary who was prescribing it, had told her, she described her symptoms, and he said, get to the ER room right away. And her experience in the emergency room after sitting there waiting, was basically the same thing. Oh, you've been off these 2 or 3 months, so there's no way that it's that. And, nurse to nurse, the nurse pulled her aside after the doctor had made his final call and said they think you're drug seeking. And what they told her, they gave her Vistarol, which is a non-benzodiazepine. It sounds like an antihistamine to me. Don't hold me to that. I'm not a medical professional if I haven't made that disclaimer. And told her the only other thing she could do was have herself admitted. She's actually lucky in a sense that, they could have forced that. I know of a hospital in the state of Georgia. If you go in there for anything like that, like a benzodiazepine withdrawal, they can literally hold you until they find a treatment facility, some state-run 30-day spin-dry cure-all. And even though technically you're not under arrest, you can't leave the hospital, the emergency room. They put the patients off into a different section, and there are actually security officers or actual police officers to make sure that you don't leave. I guess it's basically sectioning you. Even if you want family or visitors, it's like every hour somebody can come see you and maybe bring you something if you are going to go off to a hospital or whatever. It's false and imprisonment, if you ask me. I mean, and that certainly doesn't happen everywhere, thank goodness. But they gave her, that option, which she, did not want to do and have that on her record. So at the end of the day, she just got furious. She started learning a little bit more and understanding a little bit more about what was happening to her, and she said, this cannot be legal. There's no way this can be legal. It has cost her everything. This $250,000 a year job, and she may or may not ever be able to function in again. She was also older. I believe she was like in her early 60s, late 50s, and in my age range, which also can make a huge difference in your tapering process or your recovery process with that, and needs to be treated in its own. There are a lot of nuances and variables that comes with age, and in her case, this wasn't the case, but usually if you're starting to have problems in your 50s and 60s, you've been on them a long, long, long time. I don't think that was the case like with Dr. Peterson. It was something that, happened later in life, first time ever. So why, she's writing and writing and sending all these letters to all these attorneys, and she's not getting anywhere. Like I said, the job's gone, the bills are still coming in, and she's still not getting medical help. She's still looking for a doctor who understands what's going on with her. And just through a series of very fortunate and blessed events, she found a Dr. Jennifer Lee. I don't know what state that she's in. I'm sure she can be Googled, who I guess is a huge advocate and is very knowledgeable about this entire process, who then got her in touch with Dr. Yosef, who then was called in as an expert witness, because of course their side, finally, one of the law firms or attorneys called her back because they had success with this type of thing once before, although this case was a little bit bigger. And it's still a relatively new thing for them to have to be accountable for anything. But now I think she's a year into it, and obviously she's not getting better. And she's trying to see if she can get legal help, and all that time also trying to get medical help. And of course by then they had also, the same umbrella of doctors, just to back it up a minute, had sent her to one of their therapists before she met Dr. Lee, who's not a prescribing doctor. I think she's a licensed social worker, clinician. And it got to one point where they couldn't say the truth. They were now being, monitored as to what to say. Just went through an almost identical experience with the last provider I was working with. But she found one good therapist there, and they didn't like what she put in her notes. And so they immediately took her off the case and gave her another therapist, because in her note she put, I believe this patient. I believe she's really experiencing this. So this whole time you have the same group of professionals that caused the injury, knowingly or unknowingly, totally mistreated it. You have to know, after these decades now of studies and good science that's come out about it, and even the new way they're teaching. You get a younger psychiatrist, you'll find out, like Dr. Yosef, they're being taught. You get an older psychiatrist that's, old school, and, has just treated it the same way his entire career, you might be out of luck. But she also happened to be put in connection with a psychiatrist that was younger, And though he hadn't treated bind or protracted withdrawals with benzodiazepine, he did hear about it and learn about that in med school. So there is a new protocol up and coming that they're being taught, which is just phenomenal news, But even though she was in a financial bind as a result of losing this phenomenal career that she had, she still may have been in a little bit of a better socioeconomical position, and having help. I believe her husband helped her with a whole lot of this. In the beginning, just the very basics of getting out of bed and doing the very bare minimum. It's been 3 or 4 years now, I think, and she just started driving again. So it was a pretty long-term thing. And, now she's also going through the whole tapering with the other medications that they gave her off and on. They try one SSRI and then try to taper off that. That's causing a whole new litany of offenses to your whole physiological system, and so they'd switch it off to something else. So finally, she was able to find this one psychiatrist, new school, although very few that I know of, besides Dr. Yosef, have any clue how to treat this or how to address it, even believe it, to begin with. It sounds to me like, exactly what he said. He hadn't treated a patient yet, but he had learned all about this very real condition that is very specific to benzodiazepines. So I believe she began to be treated by him, and this was after the lawsuit was underway and after she got in touch with this Dr. Jennifer Lee. I would say just Google her, but it kind of all circles back to, what your socioeconomic situation is. That's just the bottom line. Dr. Peterson eventually, I don't know the details of his treatment, only that he was able to go, I keep wanting to call it Segovia, which I know is in Spain, Serovia. He was able to go to another country altogether, and he was actually put under anesthesia. And I don't know what the treatment was after that fact. I do know he's well. He seems much better. I mean, that's apparent. He shared his story and talked openly about it. And I am thrilled beyond belief, that people have access to be able to go in and do something like this. But most of us are under insurances that don't want to touch a lot of this, don't know anything about it, or, if you're at the point in your life where it's Medicare, that's it. First of all, your choices of providers, period, are completely limited, let alone trying to get somebody to help with this. And I think even my experience with this last provider, I think he felt cocky and confident in getting away with that, because I am a Medicare patient, and that is my insurance. I can almost promise you, had I been in a different economical status, that never would have happened. I recently, I had a family member who got a DUI. I sat in court all day with him. He was among the last to be called, and this is just a comparative situation. Not that a DUI has anything to do with that, although it might run into that at some point. But every single person was found guilty. No matter, now they all had the exact same situation and scenario. Bottom line is they were under the influence of alcohol while driving. It was measured through a breathalyzer or a blood test, however they were busted. Some were roadblocks, some got pulled over. But one young gentleman, about 25 years old, he had a private attorney that he had paid $5,000 to retain for this one case. Some of them had priors, other people didn't. Every single person, so I'm gonna be generous and say about a dozen. I watched and listened to about a dozen go up before the judge, and they were all found guilty except for the one that had his own private attorney. Now, his charge was identical to everybody else's. So, yeah, you know, your socioeconomical status has a whole lot to do with everything. Nonetheless, I know for me, my provider is God. That's what absolutely works in every area of my life. And upon building or rebuilding that trust and faith, even to a deeper level now that I'm really coming into a deeper understanding of how much damage this has done and how much damage was done to me. And that's what the next video will be on, where our personal accountability and personal responsibility comes in, you know. And I think I'll even go as far as to read some of the notification texting platform that they used in this with this last provider. Never even saw the man. They have I don't know how many different providers. They stated at one point they see hundreds and hundreds of patients a day. And the reason they gave for not being able to at least initially meet with the overseeing doctor was that he was opening a new clinic in another state, the sunny state of Florida. So they're a big, huge industry, and it's a manufacturing system. Yeah, you can call them, but they're just going to keep pushing you back on that platform, you know, which works to your benefit, but you have to screenshot everything. It's not something that, or email it to yourself, do something to save it. It's not like when you go back in there, all your appointment information and record information is going to be present. Every time you log back in for an appointment or you're trying to communicate with them, that's this is how the benzo brain can work. It just tripped off another thought for a video about the miscommunication or just lying sometimes that goes on between your doctor's office and the pharmacy and getting your medications called in. And what a challenge. I'm going to be very generous and not cussing and using what it really is. That too can be. But in short, yes, absolutely, it can have a lot to do with it. But guess what? Things are changing. I'm grateful. Whatever you think about it, I'm grateful that RFK is in there and doing MAHA. And I know right now a lot of his attention is on our food and the dyes and vaccines and just getting the gold standard of science. I know he knows this is an issue. The FDA knows it's an issue. Oh, and don't let me forget, this woman won. Oh, she didn't. It didn't have to go to court. Eventually, they kept making settlement offers. As soon as their side kept getting debunked, what they were doing to try to support their case, the offending doctor, was they were testing her neurological and cognitive function based on a test designed to look for dementia and other cognitive impairments that have nothing to do with bind or this brain injury that occurs. And so of course, you ask those kind of questions and you're looking for that. She could hold a conversation. She knew who the president was. She knew what day it was, those basic things, and could even go a little deeper, even though she had lost. I mean, you got to remember her starting point was way up here. So even when she came way down here, you would definitely not see signs of dementia. You would have to know what her entire daily life was, the years she was at her profession, to see what was actually taken away from her and what she was no longer able to do. So thank God for doctors like Dr. Yosef, who was able to go in as an expert witness and kind of debunk the testing itself. It was totally irrelevant. And I believe they're actually designing a new testing form. I want to say he's even involved in the creation of that, for people with these brain injuries as a result of benzodiazepines. So she won over 8 figures, a whole lot. And yes, it helped. Did it bring her career back? No. Is she ever going to be able to do that again? She doesn't know. She does know some of the intensity of the symptoms have subsided, and getting this whole suit behind her helped a whole lot, because it validated her. It wasn't about the money. It definitely was about some accountability on their part, understandable enough, but just the validation. It wasn't the mistreatment so much, although that was obviously what caused this, serious impairment. It was more about the degradation and the humiliation and the invalidation that they put this highly educated, esteemed professional through in this process. Right down to her peers and people that she worked with for years, being convinced she was just some kind of druggie or drug seeking. This is somebody with no history, in this field forever. So it does have a lot to do with it, which is why I'm going to keep showing up every day, and why I realize the utter importance of advocating for yourself, being armed with enough knowledge that your insurance, be it Medicaid or Medicare or Aetna or any insurance, and your financial status is not going to be something any doctor or provider will be able to think that they are protected, or that you are a slam dunk. I'm assuming most of them are going off the basis you'll never be able to afford an attorney, and even in her case, this was taken on a contingency basis. I mean, millions were paid out to her expert witnesses afterwards, and then, the attorneys. And it wasn't unprecedented, but it almost kind of was, in that it opened up the doors. And I think a lot more, I know my own, when they start calling you back and taking down a bunch of information and tell you on the spot, on the first phone consult, yes, you have a case. Because I called them about something totally unrelated, and not even halfway through it, yeah, I don't think we'll be able to work with you. We can refer you to somebody meaning, a lawyer that you pay and retain, and then maybe have a long shot. So in other words, I think the attorney that she hired, there was much more of a personal caring and authenticity, that may have superseded, professionalism in a good way. And very, very blessed there. But most of the others that are going to take it on a contingency, they're not going to take it if they don't think they have a damn good chance of coming out and getting their third, or whatever the deal is, even if it requires money up front for expert witnesses, if it goes that far. And the more and more cases that are won, whether they go to trial or not, is almost irrelevant. Even if, I would love to see one go to trial and, the patient wins. That might have already happened. I haven't researched into that yet, but I do know they're settling. And she held out. She held out. They after Dr. Joseph and they kind of debunked the testing that they were doing for as to what it proved and disproved. She really started totally lost my train of thought. Very common thing that we do, but also my clue to kind of wind it down and focus on tomorrow's tape. So in short, yes, your socioeconomical status can have a huge impact on the way you are both treated and mistreated. And I'm going to always try to leave things on a positive note. Things are changing, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. It's certainly not the case in my pending suit. So on that note, take very good care of yourself. Be very gentle with yourself. If all you can do is kind of hang out under the covers while, somebody merely opening the door makes you jump out of your skin to a point you have to be peeled off the ceiling, it's not going to be that way forever. It's just not. You're not some worthless, stupid, weak, druggy. You have an actual brain injury due to the negligence of either prescribing it to begin with unnecessarily or being kept on it way, way too long. And then you have some quack that wants to have you, after 30 years, either do an 8-week taper or worse, abruptly cut you off because they just think that they can do that because they're everything and you're not. Still makes my blood boil a little bit, but this has really given me such a healthy and blessed outlet to really take a look at, it's very manageable for me now, and being addressed. Exercise, I would say, is the number one most effective treatment for this, but it may take a long time before you can even get to a point where you can give yourself a daily routine. But now I'm just kind of in a position where I'm able to look at how, what few little issues I might have, physically, neurologically, how much it is like normal aging and how much of it may be, due to an improper and tapering. And the recent, it was after the week of June 24th, abrupt withdrawal. Luckily, I was able to get a new provider before I had to be hospitalized or be put in that position. It actually would have strengthened the lawsuit, but doesn't mean there isn't one now. There was still a very, very gross negligence on their part. And luckily, recorded. They automatically say, at least, that they're recording everything that you're being told. I asked my primary ones if I could record it just so I could remember her instructions, and she said no. And I didn't, but from that point on, even if it is just for your own records, then it's never going to be heard or used in a court of law. Record everything, screenshot everything. If you're going through the manufacturer, and the foreman is the psychiatrist, because it's like a conveyor belt. That's how I imagine it. Well, you're seeing hundreds of patients a day. You have 3 or 4 offices here in one state, and now you're spreading out to other states. God knows how many providers. The miscommunication is horrific for somebody that has all this in writing. But yet, instantly they were able to get all going as far back as my records in Massachusetts, where I'm actually from. They had them up in 5 minutes with the first provider that I talked to. So again, I'm going to wind this down for today, but please subscribe. I would like to be able to do this live, to interact with people and be able to talk and hear about some more experiences, answer any questions if I'm able to, tell the truth if I just don't know. I think some doctors would do well if they could take that advice. Just be honest enough to say I don't know and try to maybe lead your patient in to the right direction. You know, I think we're going to start seeing that a lot more. A long, long way to go, because you got to remember, we're starting at the lobbyists, the pharmaceutical companies, the FDA, down to the marketers, down to the doctors, down to the pharmacies nationwide. You know, as I state in every video, we prescribe more benzodiazepines and SSRIs than any other country in the whole world. According to what resource you look at, approximately 70 million Americans are currently on one or the other or both. And were placed on these based on a 10-minute consult with a doctor. Psychiatrists are the biggest offenders, but it can happen in your primary care physician's office if you're a woman, your OB/GYN, absolutely. Younger women, PMS, they will frequently prescribe, Ativan or various different benzodiazepines for things like that. But the tides are turning, guys, and we have to stick together. We need each other. We need each other. It's a revolution for me, man. I'm just, this needs to change. This has robbed people of their very lives. And, at my age, it was 30 years of my life. And when that happens to a mom, you're robbing those kids of their lives as well. We'll never know how things might have gone had this merry-go-round not been jumped on for me, it was 1997. So on that note, please give a like, drop a comment, ask a question, and subscribe. I'm not even sure what the number is. I think it has to be like 100 before you're able to go live, and it'll be a lot shorter too. And then maybe I can finally figure out like how to edit and make a decent thumbnail and add some clips in and do all that kind of stuff. But I'm committed. I'm going to show up every day for as long as it takes. And let's spread the word. Let's spread the word. Subscribe, like, share to anybody you think may benefit from anything. And on that note, I will see you tomorrow, which is a Friday. I have relatives coming in from out of town, but more importantly, I know what day of the week it is.